Well, you remember that band that B sold the Tennessee whiskey to?
The CH,
the CH, yeah.
He never would tell us who they were.
No, it was a protected secret or something.
Right.
Just moments ago, fans across the country found themselves talking about one name again. For years, Digger Maney's has been known as a man who rarely seeks attention. He built his reputation through hard work, patience, and a deep connection to Appalachian traditions. While many television personalities chase headlines, Digger has always seemed more comfortable standing beside a copper still, telling stories about the mountains, and sharing the lessons he learned from generations before him. That is exactly why the latest message associated with his name has sparked so much interest. People are paying attention not because of controversy or scandal, but because whenever Digger speaks, longtime followers know there's usually a story worth hearing. For many viewers, Digger represents something that feels increasingly rare in modern entertainment. He is often viewed as a link between old and new America, someone who can explain traditional mountain culture to audiences around the world while still remaining true to his roots. Over the years, fans have watched him navigate challenges, celebrate successes, and preserve stories that might otherwise have disappeared. His journey has never been about becoming a celebrity. Instead, it has been about protecting a way of life and honoring the people who came before him. To understand why so many people care about anything Digger has to say, it helps to understand where his story began. Long before television cameras followed him through the hills and forests of Tennessee, he was simply a young boy growing up in a community where hard work was expected and respect had to be earned. Life in the mountains was not always easy. The people there relied on one another, and every lesson carried meaning. Children learned responsibility at an early age, and they quickly discovered that reputation mattered. A person's word was often considered as valuable as any written contract. As a child, Digger spent much of his time observing the adults around him. He listened more than he spoke. Friends and neighbors remembered someone who was curious about how things worked, whether it was machinery, tools, vehicles, or the traditions that shaped mountain life. He wanted to understand the details. That curiosity would eventually become one of his greatest strengths. While others rushed through tasks, he preferred to slow down and learn every step. His father played a significant role in shaping his outlook on life. Through the responsibilities and experiences that surrounded the family business, Digger was exposed to realities that many young people never encounter until much later in life. He learned discipline, patience, and respect. Those lessons stayed with him. They taught him that every job deserved effort and that every person deserved dignity. Even decades later, those principles would remain visible in the way he conducted himself. But another influence was quietly growing in the background. Hidden among the ridges, valleys, and winding roads of Appalachia was a culture filled with stories, craftsmanship, and traditions passed down through generations. Many of these traditions were misunderstood by outsiders. To local families, however, they represented history, survival, and identity. Young Digger became fascinated by the skills and knowledge carried by the older men in his community. They knew how to build things with their hands, solve problems without expensive equipment, and adapt to difficult circumstances. The mountains themselves seemed to teach lessons. Every season brought different challenges. Winters could be harsh, summers could be demanding, and success often depended on preparation. People learned to respect nature because nature always had the final word. Through these experiences, Digger developed a mindset built on resilience. He learned that complaining rarely solved anything, and that perseverance usually mattered more than talent alone. As the years passed, his interest in traditional craftsmanship continued to grow. He admired individuals who had mastered their trade through experience rather than formal education. They understood details that could not easily be found in books. Their knowledge came from decades of observation, trial and error, and conversations passed from one generation to the next. Digger respected that kind of wisdom, and he wanted to learn as much as possible. One of the defining characteristics that separated him from others was his willingness to listen. In many communities, younger people often try to prove themselves by talking. Digger took a different approach. He listened carefully to stories, instructions, and advice. Older craftsmen noticed this quality and were often more willing to share what they knew. Over time, he gained access to knowledge that many outsiders never received. Eventually, His path crossed with legendary figures, whose names had become part of Appalachian folklore. These were individuals who possessed remarkable skills and unforgettable personalities. Some were known for their craftsmanship, others for their independence, and many for their refusal to abandon traditions they believed were important. Digger absorbed lessons from all of them. Every conversation added another piece to the foundation he was building. Years later, when television audiences first encountered him, they were not seeing a character created for entertainment. They were seeing the result of decades of experience. The calm confidence, dry humor, and practical knowledge that viewers appreciated had been developed long before the cameras arrived. That authenticity became one of the reasons fans connected with him so strongly. When Moonshiners introduced Digger to a national audience, few people could have predicted how popular he would become. Reality television often rewards drama and conflict, but Digger offered something different. He brought authenticity. Viewers felt they were watching a real person, rather than someone performing for attention. His conversations sounded natural. His reactions felt genuine. His stories reflected a lifetime of experiences rather than scripted dialogue. As his popularity increased, so did public interest in his personal journey. Fans wanted to know how he learned his skills, what inspired him, and what life was really like away from the cameras. The more they learned, the more they appreciated the values he represented. In a rapidly changing world, Digger seemed to embody patience, tradition, and self-reliance. Success, however, did not dramatically change him. People who met him often remarked that he remained remarkably grounded. Despite television fame, he continued speaking about the importance of family, friendship, and community. He rarely presented himself as extraordinary. Instead, he emphasized the contributions of the people who helped shape his life. That humility became another reason audiences respected him. The relationship between Digger and his longtime friends also became a major part of his appeal. Viewers enjoyed watching genuine friendships unfold on screen. There was laughter, occasional disagreement, and plenty of storytelling, but underneath it all was mutual respect. Those relationships reminded audiences of something important. Success is often built through teamwork rather than individual achievement. As the years went on, Digger became more than a television personality. For many fans, he became a symbol of cultural preservation. He helped introduce millions of viewers to traditions that might otherwise have remained hidden. Whether discussing history, craftsmanship, or life in the mountains, he encouraged people to appreciate the value of heritage and storytelling. Yet even as his public profile grew, he continued facing the same challenges that affect everyone else. Life brought unexpected obstacles, difficult decisions, and moments of uncertainty. Like many people who spend years working physically demanding jobs, he understood that strength is not simply about endurance. It is also about adaptation. The ability to keep moving forward, even when circumstances change, often defines a person's character. That reality would become increasingly important as new chapters unfolded in his life. Fans who had followed his journey for years began noticing subtle changes. Some wondered what the future might hold. Others hoped he would continue sharing stories for many years to come. What nobody knew was that the next stage of his journey would reveal even more about the qualities that had earned him respect in the first place. The man who once spent countless hours learning from mountain craftsmen was about to face challenges that no amount of experience could completely prepare him for. And as those moments arrived, the values he learned in the hills of Tennessee, patience, resilience, humility, and determination, would be tested in ways few could have imagined. As the story of Digger Mainies continued to unfold, life began shifting in ways that even longtime fans could feel, but could not fully understand from the outside. The quiet rhythm he had grown used to, working with friends, filming in the mountains, and staying connected to his roots, slowly started to carry a different weight. It wasn't sudden drama or a single defining moment that changed everything. Instead, it was a series of subtle signs that something deeper was happening behind the scenes. For someone like Digger, who had spent most of his life dealing with challenges in practical, hands-on ways, uncertainty was never something he welcomed. The mountains had taught him to respect what he could see, touch, and fix. But not every problem in life behaves like a machine or a still that can be adjusted with patience and skill. Some things move quietly, and by the time they reveal themselves fully, they already carry consequences. Those close to him began noticing that his pace was different, not in a dramatic sense, but in the small details that only familiar people recognize. A little more time resting between tasks, a slight change in energy after long days, conversations that still carried his familiar calm tone, but sometimes ended a bit earlier than they used to. To outsiders, these changes might have gone unnoticed, but in a life built on consistency and routine, even the smallest shift can feel significant. Still, Digger continued doing what he had always done. He showed up. He worked. He stayed involved in the craft he respected. That consistency is part of what made him so admired in the first place. In a world where many people step away when life becomes difficult, he leaned into responsibility. For him, work was never just a job. It was identity, discipline, and connection to everything he believed in. Meanwhile, fans watching from afar began to speculate. Social media often fills gaps in information with assumptions, and Digger's name was no exception. People discussed theories, asked questions, and searched for answers that were not yet publicly clear. Some believed it was simply exhaustion from years of physical work. Others worried there might be something more serious behind the quiet changes they were noticing. In situations like this, silence often becomes louder than words, because when someone known to the public does not immediately explain what is happening, curiosity grows rapidly. And in Digger's case, that curiosity was amplified by the fact that he had always been a private person. He never built his reputation on personal disclosure. Instead, he built it on craft, tradition, and presence in the moment. Behind the scenes, those closest to him focused less on speculation and more on support. The environment around him began to adjust in small but meaningful ways. Work schedules were handled with more flexibility. Demands were balanced more carefully, and conversations shifted toward making sure he was comfortable rather than pushing for constant productivity. It was not about changing who he was. It was about respecting what he might be going through. At the same time, his connection to the craft he loved remained strong. Even when energy levels fluctuated, the familiarity of working with materials, fire, and tools continued to give him a sense of stability. There is something grounding about repetition, about doing something you understand deeply, even when other parts of life feel uncertain. For Digger, that stability mattered more than anything. But as time went on, it became clear that something required attention beyond routine adjustments. The kind of situation that cannot simply be managed by slowing down or taking breaks between tasks. It was not something he openly discussed at first, because people who are used to solving problems themselves often take time before accepting help or acknowledging vulnerability. Eventually, however, there are moments in life where clarity can no longer be delayed, and when that moment arrived, it changed the tone of everything around him. What had been quiet concern turned into serious attention. Friends who had known him for years began to fully understand that this was not just a passing phase. The announcement, when it finally became part of public awareness, carried a weight that fans immediately recognized. It was not delivered with drama or exaggeration. Instead, it came in a calm, straightforward manner, very much in line with who Digger has always been. No unnecessary emotion, no attempt to shape public reaction, just honesty about a difficult reality. And that honesty struck people deeply, because in a world where public figures often hide struggles behind carefully crafted messages, there was something powerful about the simplicity of the truth. It reminded audiences that the people they watch on screen are still human. They experience uncertainty, health challenges, and moments of vulnerability just like anyone else. Fans responded in large numbers. Messages of support began circulating quickly. People who had followed his journey for years shared memories of their favorite moments from the show. Others expressed admiration not just for his work, but for the way he carried himself even in difficult times. There was a noticeable shift in tone, from curiosity to concern, and then to respect. At the same time, life around him did not stop. Work did not disappear completely, nor did responsibility. Instead, everything became more carefully balanced. The focus shifted toward sustainability rather than intensity. What mattered most was not how much could be done in a day, but how to move forward without losing stability. This period also highlighted something important about his character that fans had always sensed, but now saw more clearly. Digger was not someone defined only by strength in easy times. His real strength showed in how he handled difficulty, quietly, without spectacle, without turning personal struggle into public performance. Those who worked with him described the atmosphere as steady but more intentional. Conversations became more meaningful. Time was used more carefully. There was a stronger appreciation for small moments, shared jokes, simple progress, familiar routines. In many ways, the environment became less about production and more about presence. As news continued to circulate, discussions online expanded beyond just concern. People began reflecting on broader themes, aging, health, and the realities faced by individuals who spend their lives doing physically demanding work. Digger's situation became a point of connection for many viewers who saw parts of their own lives reflected in his experience. And while speculation continued in some corners of the internet, those closest to him focused on something much more important: stability, respect, and forward movement. Not rushing, not overreacting, just continuing step by step. Through it all, one thing remained unchanged. The identity he had built over decades did not disappear. The skills, the knowledge, the calm presence, those were still there. What was changing was not who he was, but the circumstances around him and the way life required adjustment. And as this new chapter unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the story of Digger Mainies was no longer just about craftsmanship or television. It was about resilience in a more personal, human sense. The kind of resilience that does not always look dramatic, but instead appears in quiet decisions, steady endurance, and the choice to keep moving even when the path is uncertain. What came next would define not only how fans remembered him, but how they understood the meaning of strength itself. As time moved forward, the weight of the situation surrounding Digger Mainies became something impossible to ignore, even for those who preferred to focus only on his work. What had started as quiet concern had now turned into a fully visible reality. Fans were no longer asking whether something was happening. They were trying to understand how he was handling it, and what it meant for the future of someone they had followed for so long. But even in moments like this, Digger's approach too. Life did not change in the way many people might expect. There was no dramatic shift in personality, no sudden retreat from the world he had built around himself. Instead, there was something far more familiar: steadiness. The same steady presence that had carried him through decades of work in the mountains was still there, only now applied to a different kind of challenge. For someone shaped by the Smoky Mountains, resilience was never just a word. It was a lived experience. You did not survive in that environment by reacting emotionally to every obstacle. You learned to observe, adjust, and continue forward. That mindset became even more important now, when the challenge was not external, like weather, terrain, or work, but internal and personal. Friends and colleagues noticed that his focus remained remarkably grounded. When he was working, he was present. When he was resting, he was intentional about it. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary panic. It was as if the same discipline he once applied to mastering his craft had now been redirected toward managing life itself. At the same time, those around him understood that strength does not mean isolation. One of the quiet truths that emerged during this period was how important support had become. In earlier years, Digger was known for handling things on his own, relying on experience and instinct rather than asking for help. But life has a way of teaching new lessons, even to those who think they have already learned enough. Support did not come in grand gestures. It came in small, consistent ways: adjusting schedules, sharing responsibilities, making sure he had space when needed and companionship when it mattered. The kind of support that does not draw attention to itself, but quietly holds everything together in the background. Meanwhile, fans continued to process the news in their own way. The internet became a space filled with reflection, memory, and emotion. People revisited old episodes, shared favorite moments, and spoke about how Digger's presence on screen had influenced their perception of hard work, tradition, and authenticity. Some expressed concern, others admiration, but almost everyone agreed on one thing: he had left a lasting impression. In many ways, his story had already gone beyond television. It had become symbolic, not because of fame, but because of what he represented, a connection to a slower, more patient way of living, a reminder that skill and dedication still matter in a world that often moves too quickly to notice them. As discussions continued, something interesting happened. The focus slowly shifted away from speculation and toward appreciation. Instead of asking only about what was happening now, people began reflecting on everything that had already been achieved: his journey through the mountains, his work alongside friends, the preservation of traditions that might have otherwise faded. All of it started to feel more meaningful in hindsight. And through it all, Digger himself remained consistent in tone and presence. There was no attempt to reshape his image or turn his personal challenges into public narratives. That was never his style. He continued to carry himself in the same way he always had: direct, calm, and rooted in reality. What stood out most during this period was not just endurance, but perspective. Life in the mountains teaches that nothing stays the same forever. Seasons change, conditions shift, and people adapt. You either learn to move with those changes, or you get left behind by them. That understanding seemed to guide him, now more than ever. There were moments of difficulty, of course. No journey like this comes without them. But what defined those moments was not struggle alone. It was how they were handled. Quietly, without unnecessary attention, with a focus on what could be controlled rather than what could not. For many viewers, this became the most powerful part of his story. Not the television fame, not the craftsmanship alone, but the human reality behind it all. The reminder that strength is not the absence of hardship, but the ability to continue despite it. As this chapter continued to unfold, one thing became increasingly clear. Digger Maines was not defined by a single role or a single moment in time. He was defined by a lifetime of persistence, learning, and adaptation. And even now, in circumstances that challenged him in new ways, that foundation remained intact. The mountains that shaped him had always been unpredictable, but they had also taught him something permanent. No matter how difficult the path becomes, you keep moving forward, carefully, steadily, and with respect for the journey itself.